think we are ready. So, hi everyone, I'm Anna from PMF. Really lovely to see so many of you join. Thank you for taking the time. For those of you who don't know PMF, I know many of you do, but there are new faces. I'd like to just tell you briefly who we are and what we are about. Product Management Festival is an organization that aims to amplify the impact that product managers and their supporting organizations have on their careers, teams, products, and the PM profession. We are one of the largest PM global communities based here in Switzerland, Zurich. We do strive with everything we do to contribute to the development of product managers and help them promote the importance of their role by offering them a variety of resources, data, insights, tools, and activities to empower them to be more successful, to empower you to be more successful. Some of our PMF initiatives, we have 2 global annual conferences, one of them in Singapore, the other one in Zurich, local executive circles for product leaders, global executive summits in APAC, Europe, and the US. We team up with INSEAD for the Product Management Executive Education Program, the PMF Connect sessions that you are attending today, and of course the Trends and Benchmarks in Product Management report, very insightful document based on a global survey of over 2,000 product professionals. It's completely free. So for those of you who haven't yet downloaded it, I encourage you to do so. I'll send you a link in the follow-up email. So just a quick update on our conference in November. We just announced the first keynote, and that's going to be Ram Papatla. He is a VP of Global Experiences at Booking.com. I hope to see many of you at the conference. So again, for those interested, I'm going to include a discount code in the email that's going to follow up the event. Enough about us. I'm now going to give the word to Conor Barry because it's going to be about him and how it's made, the challenges of product discovery for hardware products. Conor, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Ooh, thanks a mil, and nice to see so many friendly faces on this rainy Wednesday afternoon here in Berlin. So yeah, I'm Conor. I'm a product manager at Sumup, and I make hardware products. So mostly electronics that have some sort of software component as well. So in the past, I've worked on microphones and smart sensors for a startup in London called Mojis. They're now called Hyper Surfaces. Check them out. They began in the music instrument industry and moved more towards automotive, toys and games, and home appliances. And then I moved here to Germany to join Native Instruments to work on music production hardware like drum machines and musical keyboards and stuff. And now this year I'm working with Sumup. They're a company that started by offering an easy way to accept card payments for small businesses, but now we're branching it into lots of new areas to enable small businesses to be successful, including some exciting new hardware stuff that I can't quite share yet, but you'll see in the future soon. So I want to show you how products go from being an idea that pops up in an office boardroom to a factory in China to shop shelves and homes worldwide. And I assume that many of you watching are probably product managers for software. And the truth is that the everyday techniques and processes that you apply are mostly the same as what I do in my everyday work. But to take a hardware product from ideation to reality takes a huge variety of skills, stakeholders, and activities. Modern tech companies these days don't handle all of these activities alone. And the role of the end manufacturer in the process has changed over the years from not just assembling all of the parts in the factory, but actually contributing towards design as well. So the teams that I work in follow the same sort of cross-functional principles as software teams. However, I'll explain a bit later that it's becoming rarer and rarer that all of the detailed engineering work is actually done by this team without help from outside. First things first, hardware costs money. So let's talk money. Cost is everything. And as a product manager for hardware products, you spend a lot more time managing budgets, working on cost estimation, and eventually tracking sales and margins. In the ideation phase, you're always assessing the potential for product market fit, a major factor of which is getting the right retail price point. And for companies that rely on profit margins for every unit sold, this is where you need to make your money. So I'm going to use an example, Furbies. So I didn't work on Furbies, so this is just total guesswork, the figures that I'm about to give you. But I imagine it's pretty typical of an electronics product that sells in stores or sells online. Pretty comparable to like a smartphone, headphones, electronic toothbrush, whatever. So let's imagine that we got this amazing idea for a Furby. We have prototypes, we put them in front of some kids and they're like, this is amazing. And their parents think that it should cost no more than $40. So let's set $40 as our recommended retail price. And let's work backwards from this amount to figure how much it's going to cost us to make a Furby and how much profit we're going to make per unit. So first thing we need to remove is VAT. This varies country to country, but let's just say VAT is 12%. Immediately we're down $4.80. Then the next thing we need to sacrifice from our profit margins is the dealer margin. So if you want a shop to buy your product and sell it in their store or on their online store, they're not going to pay you full price for the product. The percentage of the total amount that you sacrifice to a dealer or a distributor varies hugely. And in this instance, I'm going to imagine that if you're a toy store, you're going to want around 40% before tax. So that means that we give the dealer around $14 of the total retail price. Now, it costs money to make this Furby. So let's look at the costs of production. So the BOM, or the BOM, the bill of materials, is the cost of all of the electrical and material components. And we're going to include packaging in here, for example. So I'm going to imagine that it costs us around $10 to make a single Furby. Often you hear about at quantity amounts, where if you're making tens or hundreds of thousands of units, things are going to end up being cheaper per unit. For a lot of factories, they also take a cut per unit on top of this bill of materials, rather than just a flat amount. So let's say that the factory are charging $1 for the cost of production for every Furby. Now we need to ship these Furbies from our factory in China to all of our warehouses and maybe to our distributors. And that might cost us $2 per Furby. Now, that's a lot of costs. What are we actually left with? We're left with a profit of $8 per Furby. Now that's a pretty good profit margin. You know, $8 profit is nothing to turn your nose at. But there are other expenses that we still have to deal with. What about the costs of prototyping during the design phase? Paying the factory to set up the assembly line, that can be a huge expense. I've put in $700,000 here, could be a lot more. Tooling, which is the creation of the tools and equipment that makes the custom injection molded parts that will be used for every unit. They are super expensive. So let's put that down as $400,000 minimum. There's certifications that need to get paid. And then we have to pay all the smart people that helped design and create this Furby. You know, our actual employees, the teams of engineers that might have been working for months, if not years, often in highly paid roles, paying their taxes, keeping the office going. This is a huge expense. So I've put down $4 million here. So if we look at the total costs, your total NRE costs, which are the non-recurring engineering costs, plus the salaries of the workers, we're now up to over $5 million. So if we think about the profit that we make per Furby is only $8, we need to sell a lot of Furbies here. The number of sales that we need to break even is selling 644,000 Furbies. That is a lot of Furbies. So I made these numbers up. And as you know, Furbies were one of the most successful toys in the world. They were making $500 million in revenue every year at their peak. They sold 40 million units within the first 3 years. But imagine if you, working on the Furby, let's imagine you were on that team and you didn't squeeze down that BOM cost. And instead of $10, it cost $15. Or imagine if you asked your boss to invest this amount of money and time and effort only for your product to be a flop. That's why failures for hardware products are so much more severe than it would be for a software product. Some industries rely on high profit margins and inflated prices, whereas others don't actually need to rely on profit margins built into the recommended retail price. So, you know, in the toy industry, I imagine that they rely on some pretty big margins. But for example, a company like Amazon doesn't care about the profit margins on something like Kindle hardware sales. They probably just about break even, and then the price of the ebooks and the services and your Amazon Prime membership, that's where they make their profit. So that's cost. How long does it take to take a project from an idea to in-store? Now, in the chat, in the Zoom chat, I want you to put in your estimation of how long it takes from when you have like a prototype that you've tested and you think it's good to actually going into a store. I want to see some answers in the chat. Put in your estimates. It takes a long time. So first of all, you need your bulletproof concept or your idea. This can take days, this can take years. If your concept is proven to be valuable to your customers, profitable, strategically relevant for your business, and feasible to engineer, it's a huge time and cost investment. So you got to get this aspect right. I've put a question mark for the amount of time that this can take here. Then you go into the design phase. This is where your tech team starts to turn that idea into something real. Your industrial designers making the shape of the product. Your electrical engineers creating the PCBs and making specs. You're starting to look for parts and potential manufacturing partners, and you're starting to write the first parts of the firmware. So I'm working on a new product at the moment, and we're just about finishing the design phase, and that took 5 months. But here I've put 3 months. Let's be optimistic. EVT stands for the engineering validation test. So this is really the first time that you hand over your work to your factory. And the factory, you're going to make a few prototype units, maybe like 10 or 20 or so. And these prototypes are usually just made by the factory to make sure that the basics are going to work. For the first time, all parts of your product are coming together. The electronics, the basic software, the industrial design, everything coming together for the first time. And you want to make sure that this is right before you progress. Then on to DVT stage. This stands for Design Validation Test. You might make 30 or a few hundred units here. And these are made using the actual tools and techniques that will be used in mass production. So your factory's got a real assembly line set up for this. If you're using plastic in your product, it takes a long time to make these customized tools for injection molding. And the goal of this phase is to create a unit that is truly ready for manufacture and certification. You get your golden samples out of these, like the one perfect unit where you're like, okay, this is good enough for us to go into mass production. But first, you have the PVT phase, which is called Production Validation Testing, where you maybe manufacture 5% or so of the total amount that you intend to make. And this is where you're validating your mass production quality and capacity. These units need to be good enough to sell, and you're usually evaluating your yield rate. What percentage of units coming off the assembly line are good enough to sell, and how many are you able to make every day? Then mass production and going to market. It takes around a month to ship something from China in pallets. It's pretty common to fly a few units from the factory if there's a need for some samples. And overland trains from China to Europe is also an option. And from here, it goes from your distributors and warehouses if you sell online. So I want to see what people said in the chat. What did they say? We got 2 years, minimum 9 months, 5 years, 2 years, 15 months. Yeah, you're all pretty right. In my experience, it's taken around 18 months. Up on the board here, I've got 15 months, not including the ideation phase. But yeah, that's pretty typical. So you're spot on. But that's a long time, you know. It's not exactly your, continuous integration, release your app update every 2 weeks. This is a long time. Which is why when you get things wrong in hardware, they remain wrong for a very, very long time. Now that said, it's never been easier to make a hardware product. Like 2 years ago, I once made a few sketches on a post-it of like a product concept that we were talking about. And I took pictures on my iPhone and sent it to our manufacturing partner in Shenzhen, and just to see what they thought. And To my surprise, within a few weeks, they sent back a functioning prototype in the hope, like they were trying to get our business and trying to say, yeah, here's the prototype, we can make this. Now, it would have taken a lot longer for us to actually go into mass production with such a concept, but it proves how fast it is now to be able to make prototypes. There's nothing new about like Western companies outsourcing to manufacturing companies in East Asia, but an interesting tide shift has happened over the last 15 years or so. These mostly Chinese and Taiwanese factories have added design skill sets to support the manufacturing process, like electrical engineers, PCB layout designers, mechanical industrial designers. And I've witnessed in companies that I've previously worked for, where they look at the cost of hiring a whole team of in-house engineers to design and engineer a product versus working with one of these factories in China who can design pretty much everything for you at a similar quality. And it becomes pretty clear which one is going to be quicker and cheaper, albeit at the risk of disclosing some intellectual property that the factory could use for other products for other companies. And this means today that many Western companies that make hardware products don't do much of the actual engineering work anymore. There are now factories that design and manufacture all of the major players for a specific type of product in the same factory. So if you're buying a new TV, the chances are that all of the competitor TV brands were also designed and made by the same factory, even maybe in the same building. So product manager for everybody here on this call, it used to be about, agility and delivery and getting features out the door as quickly as possible. And then more recently, it became more about design and discovery, figuring out the right products to make. I like Johnny Schneider's quote that continuous learning is the new competitive advantage. And I think this is also the case for hardware products. There's no longer a skill gap in the hard skills between the Western companies and the Eastern companies. These Western hardware companies only continue to exist thanks to their ability to do great product discovery for their markets. So how can continuous learning or continuous discovery work in a hardware context? Those of you working in software teams will be familiar with this, this graphic of dual track development laid out by Jeff Patton, where you are always discovering opportunities, testing them and integrating them directly and regularly into your development cycle. So for hardware products, during the early ideation and design phases, you can also follow this cadence with prototypes. But once you reach the EVT stage, where you begin to hand your designs over to the factory, you're going to get stuck because the physical aspects of your product, they begin to get locked in. Any new insights you discover after this stage may not have the opportunity to make it into your product, despite it probably taking over another year before it reaches the market. So this is why de-risking and great product discovery before committing to actually making a hardware product and investing millions of dollars is so important. So I'm going to share a few small examples about times when we just got silly things wrong. So I was working on this thing called Moji's Play, and we were just about to start our manufacturing run. It was a cool product. It was going straight to Amazon, to shops worldwide. And we had the PDFs ready for the packaging of the product. But there was the fonts fell off or something, the Adobe file, and the designer had to quickly rewrite a lot of the text on the box before it went to print. And a nice little typo, they should have proofread it. Play GAMS, make music and more. I don't know what GAMS is. Or another favorite of mine, the system requirements. We require Windows and above. Now, these are just silly little examples. We were able to fix them, but sometimes they can have bigger consequences. We had another manufacturing run where we had a few thousand units already on the market. They were selling really well. We wanted to make another batch. One of the key components, this headphone jack, had run out of supply. So the factory said, okay, we're going to just swap it out with a like-for-like model. And we thought, right, fine, go ahead, do that. But what we ended up with was a headphone jack that had the wrong orientation, meaning all of the audio, and this was a music product, was out of phase. So, up at the top of this thing, you've got like the left speaker, right speaker, ground, and microphone. The orientation of that was wrong. And the quality assurance tests that we had at the end of the assembly line weren't detailed enough to pick up an error like this. And sure enough, it actually ended up in the hands of customers before we spotted it. Sometimes companies, when they're making a hardware product, they just miss the wave, be that through technical compatibilities, the types of connectors they use. If it takes 18 months for a product to go from an idea to actually reaching store shelves, they can easily be outdated by the time that they hit the market. But even worse is when companies just don't put in the effort to see whether there were enough people with cash to spend that had a problem that could be solved with their product. But they still committed to manufacturing now. I'm not sure how much research Colgate did in figuring out how many people wanted to purchase frozen lasagna from a toothpaste brand. Another example, I've hidden the name of this company, but I had to share it. So these guys, they make audio interfaces where you plug like your guitar or your microphones into it to make music. And they got this very fancy celebrity design consultant. And he designed what he thought would be the perfect audio interface for women. So what you see aren't makeup pads, they're actually encoders for the volumes of the microphone. Safe to say this isn't the best example of product discovery ever done, and this product was never released successfully. Product managers in software teams, they often become like rock stars when they can solve big problems. But for hardware products, since you spend so much time working on it before it gets released, you need to shift your focus from problem solving to problem prevention. Many of you will be familiar with the 4 big risks as outlined by Marty Kagan. Value, will users buy it? Engineering feasibility, can we make it? Business viability, does it make sense for our business to make this, be that return of investment or our business strategy as a whole? And usability, can users use it? Can they extract the value from your product? And every single challenge that you face in a project can be categorized into one of these 4 risks, everything. And my only job as a product manager, this is all I do, is to identify these risks, prioritize the biggest risks, and figure out ways with the team to de-risk them. That's all I do every day. The way that I usually start the design and development phase of a project is by writing these 4 risks out on a physical board and with the team, identifying as many of these risks as possible to start filling our discovery backlog. And it's interesting to do this with your team when you're starting a project, because it shifts the conversation within your team to not just how do we make this, but should we make it? And it's a board that you can revisit every week and add and subtract individual risks as you work through your discovery backlog. User value is always the most important. You need to make something that people are actually willing to buy and use. And the methods for testing user value of hardware products are mostly the same as what you use in software. Now, I'm not going to give you an overview on how to do good product discovery in general. There's plenty of great stuff out there already. If you're new to this sort of thing, just Google the design kit by IDEO. They've got a nicely documented approach on human-centered design techniques that are a great place to get started. Discovery in the real world. So everything that we design, be that hardware or software or whatever, it directly modifies a real human behavior in some way. And it's so important to observe how your product changes these human behaviors in the context within which the product is used. With physical products, it's really direct, like the ergonomics, the shape, the physical affordances of the device in the context of of the real environment, they all inform how someone uses it. And essentially in hardware, you spend a lot of time doing interaction design. With real products, physical things, you can't exactly use Hotjar to get heat maps of how people use it. So the most important research tool we actually have is to simply observe people using products in the real world. And as product managers or anyone in your team, it's not your job to come up with ideas for features or design. It's not your job. Your job is to be a receiver of ideas. And if you don't expose yourself to the real world and how products really work when people really interact with them, then you're never going to receive or spot these great concepts or opportunities. A big topic when I was at Native Instruments was how do we win desk space? So people producing music, they often gather a large range of tools and instruments and put them on their desk or on shelves around them, and they're all connected to a computer. And getting a space on that desk is hugely competitive. So we at Native Instruments, we were well known for our high-end keyboards, these kind of very large, expensive, top-of-the-range keyboards. You can see one up in the top left of the screen. But there was a product led by a guy called Matthias Buze called the M32, a very small keyboard that was targeted for beginners who were maybe buying their first piece of music gear to use with their laptop. What we ended up seeing was that many of the same people who owned our luxury top-end keyboard also bought an M32, and it ended up getting a place on their desk. So why is that? Like the big one does exactly the same thing, but more. But it turns out that even all these pros with all the gear in the world, they wanted something where they could quickly play little musical parts without needing to turn all the way around to a big keyboard to plug something in or to change their setup. They just wanted something quickly beside their laptop. So the physical space in the actual context of their environment informed so much about how they used a product, which products they chose to buy. It's these sorts of insights that you can never learn if you just sit in an office and imagine what the user might do. That said, in COVID times, it's been tough to do this sort of in-person research. It's been a big struggle, and video calls can only get you so far. For Sumup, I felt the need to observe people working in their real world contexts, but I couldn't go and visit them. So to compensate, I've actually been watching a lot of live streams or videos of people just doing their jobs. And actually, I'd be keen to learn from those of you watching if you've had any successful examples of doing remote research during these Corona times. How did you compensate for not being able to observe and learn from your users in their real environments? If you've got any examples, please let's chat about them in the QA or write something in the chat. Also, I find it interesting to watch power users of technologies who have often like adopted optimized, unique methods of interacting with your product in their environment versus someone who is relatively new to using that product. So you could see in that video, this guy's got crazy muscle memory that he's built up through experience. And an interaction designer would look at this person and look at this checkout tool and ask, how can we make their life easier while keeping up their pace or productivity? Or how can we bring up new users to this level of competency? So that's more about product discovery, but I want to talk a bit about teamwork in a hardware context as well. So most of us on this call, we all work in cross-functional teams. We mix disciplines together to achieve a single goal. For hardware teams, there's a lot more variability in skill sets, given the wide range of expertise and activities required. So in a rugby team, there's a huge variety in the types of players. So the tall players have special roles. They do different types of training, and on the pitch, they fulfill their own special types of jobs. The small, fast guys have their own specialties, as well as the heavy, strong guys. In hardware, there will be natural domain splits within the team as well. Industrial designers and mechanical engineers, they'll naturally work together. Electrical engineers and firmware developers will work together as well. And you can't expect everyone in your team to work on the same thing together. There will usually be a few different threads of work all running in parallel within the same group. But in the end, everybody has the same goal and the same aligned vision. And as a PM, you can't pretend to understand all of these very complicated disciplines. It's your job as PM to empower everyone with the business context that they need, provide them with direct access to potential users, and evangelize the real problems that are worth solving. This is your primary role. Teamwork within such diverse groups is often tough because these disciplines may have a hard time communicating or collaborating with each other, which is why I love demos and live prototypes. When you have something you can touch, see, interact with, it makes conversations and decisions flow so much easier, and this will always win over using waterfall roadmaps or spec sheets. In hardware teams as well as a PM for hardware, you also have a lot more stakeholders than normal. You've got the whole manufacturing aspect where you have a supply chain, the factory liaisons, parts suppliers. You have much more conversations with accounting and legal teams. And in sales and marketing, you're now dealing directly with retailers and distributors that are going to sell your product in real stores. With this many stakeholders, it's easy to find yourself waiting or getting blocked. All of these stakeholders will be crucial to your project, but they're not working in neat 2-week sprints for you. So involving as many stakeholders as early as possible in the process, even if it's just little small things, it's great. You give them visibility, you get buy-in right away. Again, prototypes and demos are essential to keep everyone on the same page. With electronics products, there becomes a much richer history and pool of knowledge assembled into one physical object. So this is a picture of a piece of music equipment made by Ableton, where if you unscrew the back of it, you can see the signatures of all of the people that worked on it. It's a nice touch. And there's value from having durable, long-lasting teams with the same area of focus in any team, for software included. But for hardware, it's particularly important because sometimes ideas from past generations of a product that may not have been technically feasible then can now be revived. Sometimes an old forgotten concept may have found new relevance. When you have a team of engineers that have seen these previous designs and prototypes and problems in the field, that's an invaluable resource and worth keeping them around for. Within Sumup, we're doing something pretty interesting that's probably going against the more recent trends, where we're bringing back many of these hard skills that are needed to design and engineer electronics back into our main office in Berlin. Now, we feel that to design products that are really innovative and meet the future needs of the market, we need to design our own hardware from scratch. Now, we're not setting up assembly lines in Alexanderplatz, but you will see engineers with soldering irons and electrical components working away inside our office. And it's exciting to see products take shape. It's something real that you can touch, is immensely satisfying. And it's really, really cool when you see a product that you've made actually being used by someone out in the real world. So I'm going to wrap it up there, but I hope with this talk, I've given you an insight in what it takes to make an electronics product, and how much time and money it takes, the importance of product discovery, the usage of risk assessments to do problem prevention rather than solving problems after they've arisen, the importance of designing for the real world, and how teamwork feels. If any of you are interested in this kind of work, remember that your skills in software product management are totally transferable. You may be intimidated by some of the engineering terminology involved, but at its essence, it's the same work. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me directly if you're ever looking for advice on how to break into the world of hardware. But yeah, for now, let's wrap it up. Thank you to PMF, and yeah, let's have some Q&A. Feel free to unmute yourself and chat directly, or just ask questions in the chat. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, really, really interesting talk. Thanks, Conor. Again, if anybody has questions, these are most welcome. Feel free to just unmute yourself, or if you're feeling shy, you can also write them.
Actually, we have a few responses about the customer visits. So they did complete discovery with SMB merchants completely remotely. Savitha, if you're online, I'd love to learn how you did that.
Sure. This is Savita from PayPal. If you want, I can answer now or connect offline.
Yeah, please. If you're happy to share, it'd be great.
Yeah, so we had completed our learning plan just before COVID hit, and we were about to start our discovery. And thanks to COVID, we all had to brainstorm and figure out how do we do this remotely. Our specific problem was to identify the challenges of SMB merchants from Asia who are selling products cross-border, and specifically how do they manage their business post-transactions. So it was completely remote. All these merchants were based out of Asia, and because of language reasons, we chose only English-speaking merchants. And we used GoToMeeting to do the entire interview. And it was a 90-minute interview scheduled with each merchant. And we had formed a team during the interview itself, where one would take copious notes of each and every word that was spoken during the discussion. And we actually had multiple scribes rather than one. And we recorded the session, obviously. And we took turns in terms of who would be the interviewer between researcher, product manager, and designer. But what was helpful was after these interviews, since our team was also remote, we couldn't go into a room to use a whiteboard. We used Miro extensively, and we had immediate follow-up sessions right after the interview where we converted these notes into multiple different structures. And the distillation process itself, like if we had 8 interviews, we had actually follow up 16 discussions, and we're still yet to finalize. We're in the process of preparing the readout material and share the key insights with the management team for the next business case. uh, Very interesting but very exhausting
Yeah,
exercise,
it's
but
so
it's
much more
possible.
work.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Miro's definitely been a game changer for us as well. Just to throw everything in a single space that everyone can see and access and play around with. It's been really great. One thing that I found quite helpful, especially when it came to hardware stuff, because it's all about physical interaction, was just asking people if they were going to their shop or whatever, even if it wasn't open, just to go in and shoot a video of what they would normally do throughout their day, and take a video for us and send it to us, and just, you know, have them speak aloud as if we were there with them.
Yes, yes. So definitely miss the observation part, right? Because what you say versus what you do, there's always a difference, and that is
Of
possible
course,
when you're
of
in
course.
live. But still, I think we could manage to crack the most critical problems for these SME merchants.
Yeah, agreed. From Toon Peters, how do you talk to your future customers in the early stages? Great question. It is so hard. Obviously, it's easier to find customers that already use your product, but if you're branching out into a new product line, it's tough. So there's kind of two ways you can do about this. I'll be honest, I do the more lo-fi way more often, where I just try and walk into, like, so we're working for shops and small businesses around Berlin. I've just been going in and asking questions to strangers as much as I possibly can, which, you know, you do find yourself in a bit of a Berlin bubble because you're not exactly, you know, Sumup is also very popular in Brazil, and the needs of small merchant businesses there are totally different to those here in Berlin. So the lo-fi way is easy. The proper way, where you actually have to you have to advertise to your target customers to get them enrolled in some sort of research program. So in the past, we've used like Facebook ads, where you can target specific demographics and try and recruit them with, hey, join us in our research and we'll give you free stuff, or we'll pay you money or something. Yeah, it's expensive and you have to pay for it. Do you meet them and show them your sketches? Yes, if we have a hypothesis or an assumption around a design concept or a new feature or even an entirely new product line, we'll definitely show them really, really rough stuff, be that, you know, just a drawing on a piece of paper or a piece of cardboard. How do we test our ideas? In my world, when it's very physical things and it's very interaction design, it's always better to just give them something physical that they can play with. And you stand back and you watch. And you ask them to speak aloud as they use the prototypes. You don't prompt them on how to use it, and you leave really long, awkward silences to see what it takes for them to figure out how to use it. And only when they're at the point of giving up can you prompt them, so you can ask them to maybe try the next task. So, you know, if I'm testing a new mug, you would go to them with your prototype and you would say, so how would you fill this mug? And then you just watch them, and maybe your mug has a big hole in it and you watch them struggle, and maybe you learn something. So yeah, observation and staying silent is really, really good. Do we have trusted customers you go back to for every product? I think as you go through the design and ideation phases, you're also narrowing in on your target customer. You're getting a clearer idea of who your ideal personas or target marketer type of customer really is. And yeah, through the recruitment process, you're going to come across some of these people. And naturally, you will find people who are more willing to give feedback, who have interesting feedback and are very communicative. And you can really bring them on as collaborators and, you know, co-creators throughout this process. I had one product in my last company where we had a handful of musicians that we talked to every couple of weeks, and we gave them all of our prototypes, and they kept on getting involved in the product. So yeah, you do end up having trusted customers. It's important not to get too narrow with this, because then you just end up designing a solution that a couple of individuals work rather than something that meets wider needs. But yeah, you do come across trusted customers that you can go back to. Cool. Any other questions? Or even just comments? Okay, there's one. You mentioned having a lot of dependencies within your cross-functional team, which can sometimes lead to you or others being blocked, waiting for someone else to make time for you. What are some of your strategies to minimize this? Good question. Dependencies, strategies to minimize. You try and find one key person in each area. So, you know, if you have a sales and marketing team, and you might have lots of people who are involved in your product, you try and find one key person that you can really bring on as a collaborator. And that key person is someone that you meet regularly with, you share all of your documentation with, and you ask them to be your mouthpiece for their department. So when you begin a product, you need to speak to so many people, everyone in every department, and eventually you can recruit one person within each department and make them a collaborator. And then you keep them involved, you treat them like a team member. Yes, you might not be setting them deliverables, or you're not exactly organizing their backlog, but you're sharing regular updates, you're sharing prototypes, you're constantly getting feedback, and you're asking for them to get feedback from their colleagues as well. So that can work. With stakeholders outside of your company, especially in hardware, it can be a bit more like classic client relationship, where, you know, you have contracts, you reach agreements, you set milestones, and you need to deliver these milestones in order to, you know, fulfill this contract. So that's a bit more classic as well. So you don't have to worry about monitoring those so much. What's your role, involvement as a product manager in driving down the BOM cost? You say, I need it for cheaper a lot of the time. So what's good is always to provide the business context to your entire team. So if you're doing your early on research and you think, okay, the mug example, we think this mug is going to sell really well if it's €4. And if it's €5, we're going to lose more than the equivalent of the extra cost. And then, of course, you're going to give this concept to your designers and your engineers, and they're going to make the world's most beautiful cup. And they're going to say, sorry, but it costs $10. This is just a natural thing. And you need to always remind them, no, target BOM cost is this. But it's better if you provide them with the business context. And instead of just saying, has to be $10, you say, well, if it's $10, there are so many people that will never be able to see your beautiful design. Give them the real context of the real people that will end up using your product in order to encourage them to make a solution that fits the right price point. How do you deal with pressure from management on launch dates? Well, you can only really launch hardware when it's ready. You know, it's a trade-off. Deadline pressure is something that we always deal with, and it's a part of the job, and we can't do our jobs without it. So you need to set milestones. You need to, like, we still use OKRs in hardware, where we set our objectives on a quarterly basis, and we do our best to fulfill them. Dealing with pressure from management is, you know, it's kind of a core part of the job. It's stakeholder management, and you need to give them the scenarios, the outcomes. So if we delay by this amount, we will be able to achieve this. Whereas if we release now, these will be the consequences. And you have to be very objective about the scenarios, because no one likes anything being late. But there are reasons for it being late, and you need to make those crystal clear and provide those as scenarios to your key stakeholders. How do you scale if you have multiple PM for your hardware product? So yeah, I worked on a hardware product where there was a split between hardware and software for the product. I personally hated this approach because there was natural dependencies and there wasn't much cross collaboration, and we really struggled to innovate in that key area where the software meets the hardware. I much prefer the approach where if your product is too complex to be designed and developed by one team, you try and separate your multiple product teams to independent value streams of your product. So, mug example again. This mug provides a few different types of value. It contains your tea, it keeps it warm, and it provides you a handle from which it's easy to drink, right? Those could be seen as three potential different value streams. One team could focus on keeping it warm, one team could focus on retaining liquid, and the other team could focus on the delivery of the tea to you. And these are all independent value streams, and that would be a better way to separate it rather than having, one team focused on the ceramics, one team focused on the, I don't know, maybe a bad example, but I think in software and hardware products, you begin to see these splits between back-end teams and front-end teams. But if you don't combine the back-end and the front-end, then you'll never be able to ship an item. So it's the classic slicing the pie conversation that you see a lot in product management. If you want to learn more about that, I'd recommend reading the Shape Up product development guide. It's an unusual approach to product development, I think, but they do give some nice examples on slicing the pie into independently valuable, shippable parts of the thing. And in hardware, it's just a case of combining those things together. Okay. Setting OKRs on hardware. Would you have an example, and why separately for hardware when the product is an entire value proposition? I will be honest, setting OKRs in hardware when you're in the design phase and when your product is going through manufacturing, that can be quite a waterfall process. And you will end up, putting your waterfall bricks of EVT phase, 20 units delivered to our office is a key result, which isn't exactly the best usage of OKRs, but it's a way to set goals, it's a way to measure progress. And it's only when your product is really on the market and you're seeing how it has an impact on your customers that you can begin to define metrics. Like, you can still have, retention or an Amazon rating or something like that, something measurable that represents what you're trying to achieve through your product for the company's strategy. So yeah, at the moment, my OKRs during this design phase are to get it ready for manufacture. And I imagine that when we release this product, we will have KPIs based around usage and integrate those into our key results and see whether our product is really fulfilling the needs of our users and meeting our company's strategy. And because that's why we wanted to make this thing in the first place. Does the hardware PM focus strictly on hardware, or does he also need to think about the software, e.g. a handheld barcode scanner running on Android? Well, I just kind of mentioned that about if you have domain splits between technical areas, then maybe that's not the best approach. Whereas if you have domain splits based on value streams, that's a better approach. I always prefer to have as much of a single product within one team as possible until it just gets out of hand. And maybe you have, more than a dozen engineers and you just need to find natural breaks in the product. So yeah, try and associate your teams to individual value streams. So, anything else? That's all the questions for now. Do we have some more time, Anna? Where are we at?
Yes, we do have a little bit more time. If anybody would like to share experiences, also welcome. Just unmute yourself and speak. Conor, will you be also accepting questions on Sumup?
Sure, yeah.
Perhaps there are
people. So there's also some other Sumuppers on the line as well, I think, so they can help out.
So anybody feel free. Let's wait a couple of more minutes. Give a last chance.
That said, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm not much of a Twitterer, but I've included my social media thingy there, or you can just you can stalk me on LinkedIn and send me some questions. I should also say that Sumup is hiring some positions still, which is amazing. So check out our website if you want to join me in Berlin making some awesome hardware stuff. Can you go into more detail? What's the consequences of collaborating with engineers in China and a team in Europe? Yeah, so if you look at an entire project on paper, an ODM, an original design manufacturer in China, is going to end up probably being technically cheaper and quicker. That's just the reality of how it is. When you're working with an original design manufacturer in China, you spend a lot more time making spec sheets, product requirements documents, and trying to cover all of your bases before you hand it over to those guys, and they deliver you some prototypes. The feedback loop can be pretty slow compared to if you just have a few people working around some desks making prototypes together. Of course, things move very quickly. So I think if you're committed to making a product which is designed and engineered through an ODM partner, it should be a product that maybe is very well scoped, where there isn't maybe that much innovation to it, where maybe there's already an existing example of it on the market and you want to do something similar for your company, where, you know, the washing machine is the classic example. All washing machines are the same and they're mostly made by the same 3 factories in China, even though they're made by all the different companies in the world. Whereas if you are making something that is truly innovative, then perhaps you want to work more with a team that's in-house so that you can do this continuous discovery and prototyping and trying random ideas out that you couldn't do if you were collaborating with a factory remotely. The other more kind of like everyday consequences, I'll be honest, a lot of the choice of who you work with through a manufacturing partner is like, first of all, what's their track record, what's their cost, and how good is their phone connection, because communication is really, really tricky. And also intellectual property concerns are also there, because if you share something that is a unique design to your product and you give it to them, it's likely that if they find it valuable, they will offer it to their other customers that might make similar products as well. And this is just unavoidable. And as much as you can put your patents or your confidentiality agreements around this, it's not the reality of how products really get made. Products are always just incremental improvements over the last normal thing. So you have to be careful about that as well. What's the rationale in having the same fee for all cards, including Amex? I guess your fees for you are way higher. Does it not make a huge impact on your business, or is this a strategic choice as a sales incentive? To be honest with you, I have no idea about the card processing side of Sumup. Are there any other Sumuppers that can talk about our transaction fees as a strategy?
Well, I cannot say exactly from the strategic choice, but I'm pretty much assuming it's the same as Amazon and Kindle, which you've mentioned. So it's not like the dividends for the customers is that they have an exact percentage that they know the exact percentage that is being charged on any transaction. So it's clear, it's visible. There's no surprises. There's no small letters. You know exactly what you are charged for, and I think that's the rationalize behind it, to make it simple and clear for the customers, basically for the merchant.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I had an interview with a guy who had just opened a cafe here in Berlin a few weeks ago, and he signed up for a different card terminal thing so he could accept cash payments. and he received this lengthy legal contract. He was told that he needed to do a security audit, which would take 3 weeks. He was told that it was a 24-month-long contract with variable fees based on how much he made. And he gave up on that. He went to MediaMarkt, bought a Sumup card reader for 30 euros and accepted card payments within an hour. So, you know, that's kind of the value proposition of Sumup. Just make things easy, because opening a small business is stressful enough as it is. You've got bigger things to worry about.
Great, thanks. If there are no more questions, we can wrap up.
Cool. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for hosting us, Anna.
Thank you, Conor. It was great having so much engagement from the audience. Thanks everyone for joining, and see you at the next PMF Connect or a PM Night, or in November here in Zurich. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Cool. Ciao.
Bye.